Learning to become, learning to learn, learning to thrive, learning to flourish, learning to care.
It is now time to listen to our voices.
To prepare a better future.
Treat others and
the planet as you would wish to be treated.
Collaborating
and develop in partnership. We have the capacity
to understand,
to take action, to take care of ourselves, others, and the planet.
And we want to invite you
to really work together
and collaborate so that we can have an impact now.
Welcome to Learn.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy and grateful to be here at this great Learning Planet Festival. My name is Elsa Grangier. I'm a journalist and I'm also a social entrepreneur. 170 Parisian kids have written a chart for child rights. 310 European kids have written a declaration for the right of the planet brought to Ursula Van Der Leyen herself last November. 6 young Portuguese activists are suing European countries over the climate change. And this is not an exhaustive list of all concrete initiatives young people are able to do. What could we do to help youth be confident in their abilities to be engaged in how society is run? How could organizations, states, associations help them to go further? What would be the impact and the consequences on their action in the global education system and the world itself? This is some of the questions the amazing high-level panel will answer to address the global theme. What if youth could ask for new rights? So I can tell you how pleased and honored I am to share this roundtable today, who is aiming at answering this question. So to go deeper in the solution, I'm happy to present all my great panelists this Sunday. So Kiran Birsetti, she's the founder on Riverside School India and Design for Change. Hi, Kiran. Nicholas Brando, Newton International Fellow, Center for Children's Rights in Ireland. Nicholas Brando, you're currently a Newton International Fellow, and you do research in political and moral philosophy. Tell me if I'm wrong. And you're especially in the field of human and children rights. And you co-edited the book Philosophy and Child Poverty, published widely on the philosophy of children's rights. Hi, Nicholas. Rana Dajani. Hi, Rana. You're a PhD in molecular and cell biology from University of Iowa, and you're also the great founder of We Love Reading in Jordania. You're now fellow at the Jepson School of Leadership at the University of Richmond, and you're also the author of the great book, 5 Scares Doing the Impossible, and We Can Reverse Self-Hate. Why can't we redefine success? And I think you're right. Hi, Rana. And Zamzam Ibrahim, you're the Vice President of the European Student Union. This organization is the umbrella of organization of 45 national union of students for 40 countries. And the aim of your association is to present and promote the educational, social, economic, and cultural interest of students at the European level toward all relevant bodies, and in particular, the European Union, Bologna Follow-up Group, Council of Europe, and UNESCO. Then, hi, Zamzam. Then, Andreas Stelcher. Thank you to be here with us, Andreas. You're the Director and Directorate for Education at OECD. Thank you to be there with us. François Tadei, also. François, who didn't know you? Everybody's know you. So you're the Chief Explorating Officer at the CRID, the Centre de Recherche Interdisciplinaire in France. And it's thanks to you that we are all there together to discuss this fantastic topic. Thank you, François, to organize everything for us. And then we have the chance to have Dominique Versini, with the vice-mayor at the town of Paris, and you're in charge of the right for the children and the protection for the children as well. You're a former minister and a former defensor for the kids as well in France. Thank you to be there, Dominique. And just to precise a little bit something about you, you're going to discuss in French, but everything will be translated directly in the chat. So please, to have the global speech and meaning of what Dominique is going to say, you can go directly in the chat. It will be automatically translated. So now I have presented everybody, and we can go a little bit further to know exactly what the project you are leading all together. And would you please introduce yourself and give details about this project, consistency with our topic? What if youth could ask for more rights. Kiran, it's up to you now.
Thank you, everybody. It is such a delight to be here and to see some new friends and some old, not old by age, I have to say. So thank you for this lovely invitation. And yes, I think in the times that we're living in, the voice of the child and the rights are so, I think it can't be a more urgent time to talk about this topic. So a little brief about the work we're doing in this area. Actually, I mean, a little bit of a background. My life didn't start by wanting to do anything with children's rights till I became a mother. And that's really how my interest in education started. So when my son was all of 5 years old, I think I reacted to a system that rewarded compliance over conversation, you know, to keep our children quiet and to be good. But I think as a designer, I turned this crisis into an opportunity. And I had the luxury of asking the question, what if? Because I didn't come from education, so I didn't have any rules. So the question really was, what if we invite children into a learning journey rather than designing for them? Could we have them speak to us and design a learning journey with them? So when I started my Riverside School in 2001, that was really the quest. And we used design thinking principles to create a very simple framework called Feel, Imagine, Do, and Share. We call it FIDS for kids, to get learners to unleash their student agency, but always starting with empathy, feel. And we call this the I Can mindset. So once we saw that the impact of this mindset Riverside, we took it to the world. And when I launched Design for Change in 2009, to get children to use this framework to change their worlds. So children now in over 60 countries are using this to, change the weight of school bags or stop child marriage. That's really the power of what I feel the student voice does. Well, over the last 20 years, it's been such a pleasure to witness these change stories. I've become a storyteller, and that's all I do across the world, just be a champion for our children's rights. But I think what's really important is I think children are recognizing themselves as not mere spectators of life, but I think participants and overseers of change, and that they can make the world a little bit more just, a little bit more beautiful, and a little bit more equitable. So that's really the work with Riverside and Design for Change.
Okay, thank you so much, Kiran. And then we can hear Nicholas, and I think it would be interesting to know more about the research you made, especially with the child.
Thank you so much, Elsa, and thank you so much, Kiran. So as Elsa introduced, I am a philosopher by training. I decided to focus on more applied issues of philosophy, so looking at how philosophy can speak into real-life issues and real-life questions. In particular, I'm focused on issues of childhood, of children's freedom and children's rights. And I think similar to what Kiran mentioned of trying to see children and youth not as spectators, but as actors in life. We try in the Center of Children's Rights in Belfast to do the same, but from the perspective of research, right? So the work that we do aims to go beyond merely studying children by including children and youth throughout the whole research process. We set the research objectives and priorities in tandem with an advisory group of children and youths. We analyze the data together with them, and we jointly discuss the results and the dissemination process. So the core, as I mentioned, the core focus of my research has been on looking at exploring what children are, how we perceive children in society, and how does this impact on the rights that they have and the rights that they claim. A couple of the projects I'm working currently, which are relevant to this issue, we did a large-scale survey on the impact of the COVID 2020 lockdowns on children's rights protection. We've surveyed around 30,000 children and youth across the globe on questions of health, education, security, play, participation, etc. And the idea was not only to ask children how they felt, but also explore the data with the children themselves. Besides this, the central project I'm currently working on looks at the theory and implementation of children's rights, particularly with children themselves, and focused on marginal cases of childhood. So for example, children who live on the streets, child workers, child migrants. And the idea is not only to explore what these issues are, again, just as with the COVID project, but explore it with the children themselves. So it's not only to look at what should child workers be, but ask child workers themselves what they think their rights are. And I think that this is the objective, try to balance doing high-level research on the topic of childhood, but by introducing children themselves throughout the whole process.
Yeah, that's it. Can you give us a little overview about the research you've made directly on the COVID-19? What were the main learnings, just to have a big picture in 1 minute?
Yes, so I mean, it was such a large project that we have a lot of things, and I think that we're going to start bringing out a lot of briefs on the topic, but based on the priorities set by our child advisory group, we decided to focus on 3 issues to do our first analysis, particularly education, and how do children themselves feel that their education may have been affected or benefited by the lockdown. I mean, we think that maybe the fact that schools were closed was a bad thing, but for many children, actually studying at home was very beneficial. And I think that this balance is important to explore. And the other 2 topics was they were very concerned with the issue of violence during lockdown. The fact that especially girls suffer from household violence, sexual violence, that there's an increase in online harassment as well. They were very interested, the advisory group was very interested in exploring this topic and finding solutions to this. So these were the 2 main issues that we're currently addressing and looking at. And we're looking forward to sharing the results when they're fully analyzed with the kids themselves.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it will give another common point with you and Dominique, because it's exactly the same. She saw it during the work you've met, Dominique, that the violence was a surprising topic expressed very widely by the kids you manage. But we can discuss that furthermore after all. Okay, thank you so much, Nicolas, for this presentation. And Rana, it's your turn to express all the fantastic things you've made. We love reading, and all the things you are doing on the top of We Love Reading, because it's not the only thing you've made.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, so I think I wear 5 scarves. I play 5 roles instead of saying 5 hats, because I wear a scarf. And I say about my 5 scarves. So I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, educator, I'm a scientist, I'm a social entrepreneur, and I'm a feminist. And you can read all about it in my book, as Elsa said, 5 scarves doing the impossible. But I'm going to focus today and talk about We Love Reading. So We Love Reading is a program that changes mindsets through reading to create change makers. What we do is we train youth how to read aloud as an art, and how to start reading aloud sessions in their neighborhood. And what they do is they are local volunteers. They gather the children and read aloud to them in their native language, stories from the culture and the context, so that the children have a boost in their identity and are proud of where they come from. And then after they read aloud, the children take the books home and they exchange it in an exchange program. This is very important for the human-human interaction, which is so important for the development of our brain and our neurons, because that's how we evolved as a species. We are social creatures. And then when they exchange with their family and their siblings and their friends, they become the drivers of change, rather than a top-down but a bottom-up approach of celebrating, not just reading for fun, which leads to learning for fun and motivating them to want to seek opportunities to learn. Now, what we've seen because of this program, that it does many things, but most importantly, it boosts this feeling of ownership and agency and responsibility in those who are reading aloud to the children. So they actually discover their voices literally by reading, and figuratively by becoming leaders and saying, if I can do this, what else can I do? Becoming responsible citizens who are not victims waiting for somebody to save them, but people who take control and agency and ownership and solve the problems of their community. And this is so important for sustainability on the long run. And we call this our secret magic, our secret sauce, that we encourage other people to adopt. So in terms of innovation, this program is innovative because it creates a mindset of I can, and it's based on universal values that are shared across the world. All you have to do is to read a child's book. And that's why the program has spread now to 61 countries and counting. And lastly, it harnesses technology in a way that serves the child and serves the youth rather than the other way around. And all this is based on research. Because I'm a scientist, I invite collaborators from across the world, locally and internationally, to study the impact of the program. What we've discovered because of COVID-19 is that now the program that has moved online to give training in 10 languages is that it has become a placeholder instead of school and education to keep the children engaged with learning and having fun. As Nicholas mentioned, children are learning more because they're doing it for fun. They're having that interaction with the parent that's very important. But also we found that it affects mental health. So the children and the youth and parents who are reading aloud, this, because they're engaging in a human interaction, this is helping boost their resilience and decrease their stress, which is very, very important. And it has created social entrepreneurs and created a network globally of people at the street level who can disseminate information, behavior change, and allow us to understand what's happening at the level of the ground. So we invite you, since now you've heard about We Love Reading, to go and read to yourself, to children, to everybody around you. Thank you.
We will. Thank you so much, Rana. Zamzam, it's up to you to express a little bit more about the project you led, especially the one who built the law directly to the parliament.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm Zemzem. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I am currently the Vice President of the European Students' Union, even though it's a role I'm very new to. I was formerly the President of the National Union of Students in the UK, where I was a part of founding an organisation called Students for Sustainability, Students Organised for Sustainability, and it was a coalition organisation, an organisation essentially set up by students for students, and one of the, I think, to me, one of the most impactful campaigns that I was involved in, and still am involved in the sense that it's still running, was that we worked with young people from the UK climate strikers as a part of Fridays for Future, and we drafted the first ever bill that was presented to Parliament in the UK. And I was saying to Elsa, it was a year ago, February last year, and it feels like it was yesterday because of how time has just kind of felt like a lapse. But to me, it was an incredible opportunity to work with young people from all across the UK, and in every corner of the UK, for them to develop a bill that looked like what they wanted to see, and pass through Parliament. And I think it was incredibly important and vital to show that, and often almost always, like, young people are undermined in the sense that when they work and become politically active, they're told, oh well, isn't that cute? Look at these climate strikers doing action and doing some form of striking across the world. But I think Fridays for Future, to me, showed a level of resilience I've never seen in an adult, in the sense that thousands and thousands and thousands of children were walking out of classes, right? Like, knowing full well that they might get in trouble, and we're working together and organizing together in the sense that I remember connecting up schools. So if there was one principal that was like essentially like punishing students for campaigning, then what would happen is all of those schools that are local would like send letters to that principal, condemning him and like putting things on Twitter being like, how dare this principal can like essentially like punish these children for like their very right. And I think that was really powerful and for me, in the sense that understanding the role that we as young people hold in the stake that we hold in our future, and so the bill for me was I mean, for me, it was the first indication that like actually like every single bill that is formed from now on should have consultation with young people, and it should be led by young people. But if anything, should always have young people as a part of those discussions, because at the end of the day, regardless of the outcome, they are the ones who are going to pay the price for whatever is decided and whatever bills come into place. But Teach the Future is the campaign that we started. Teach the Future had some asks. So the first ask was for the government to review its systems in climate education, right? So what are we learning, and where are the faults? The second one was to ensure that every teacher across the board had the ability to teach about climate sustainability. And the third one was for our schools and our learning spaces to be just and sustainable, in the sense that they should all be carbon neutral by, I think the year was 2023, and a commitment that any new bills that are built from now on are going to be built with the intention of them being climate neutral. And the final ask was there to be an endowment fund for young people to continue to do climate work and climate education. And I think for me, it's incredibly important that, like, as young people, we are educated in political education. Political education right now is a privilege, in the sense that and it isn't something that we are all privy to. And I mentioned this to Elsa, I think that one of the most powerful tools that young people have utilized, especially my generation, is the power to connect over the internet, to make tools that were often almost always behind closed doors, in the sense that they were impossible to access, have made them free and accessible, and also digestible to anybody that wishes to engage with them and anyone that wishes to learn from them.
Thank you so much, Zamzam. We will discuss a little bit more about the influence of the social network during the roundtable. So thank you. And I'm very happy to welcome Andreas as well. And it's up to you now to express a little bit more about the project led by the OECD regarding the topic of the right of the kids, because we know that you are very involved in that part. And I'm sure that what Zamzam said, it gave you not only ideas, but also resonance with the work you're doing in the OECD. Oh, you have to switch on your mic, Andreas, because it's not working for the moment. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, great.
Okay, so yeah, first of all, thanks for putting the topic of children's rights on the agenda. I think that's so important. You know, children are just a small share of our populations, but they are 100% of our future. So we better give them a voice in that, shaping that future. And like Kieran, you know, what we have seen at the OECD when we started to do that children are actually perfectly capable of doing that. Actually, they do have very clear ideas, you know, of how they learn best and how they do not learn. In fact, some of the voice from children was better aligned with what we know from neuroscience and, you know, research on learning than what we know from, you know, pedagogy, you know, the learning that was framed by adults. So I think children are capable of expressing their voice, of articulating it. Our concern at the OECD is less about the children right aspect and more about the children agency aspect. It's one thing, you know, to formulate rights, but actually, can you fill that right? Our education systems are still so much compliance-based. We have figured out how to educate second-class robots, you know, people who repeat what we tell them. But actually, what does it mean to be a human, you know, to actually, you know, take responsibility, to mobilize your cognitive, social, emotional resources? This is where really the big shortfalls are of our education systems. And, you know, us being the OECD, we have tried to sort of see which countries are doing better and less well on this in our latest PISA assessment. Maybe actually, if I have 2 minutes, I'll share a couple of slides with you on that, just to give you a sense of this. First of all, the framework behind this was really to look at, you know, to what extent do young people appreciate different ways of thinking, different ways of working, can engage with people from other cultures, but then also to what extent are they willing and capable to take collective action, you know, like what we have heard from Zamzam. Now, on the one hand, you can say actually national curricula are making an effort. Now, for example, we just talked about educating for climate change. You could see actually 90% of schools in the OECD area do something about it. So there is an effort to sort of bring that on the agenda. And what we can also see is that students actually take a lot of responsibility in this field. For example, most students, you know, 70% in the OECD area say, I reduce the energy I use at home to protect the environment. Or, you know, still 30%, I sign environmental social petitions online. I, you know, choose certain products for ethical or environmental reasons if they are a bit more expensive. So you can actually see young people in their daily lives take a lot of responsibility for the environment. But now, when you bring that back to schooling, you can see 80% of young people say looking after the global environment is really, really important to me. You can see that ownership of the future in the mindset of young people. But when you look at agency, only sort of about, 57% say, I can actually do something about the problems in the world, or I think my behavior can impact people in other countries. This is our biggest concern, the sense of disempowerment that our education systems create among young people. On the one hand, we do a lot of things, a lot of activities, but they all have made children passive consumers. They have not made them agents of creators of this. And of course, it varies across countries. Now, you can see some countries, in all countries, basically, looking after the global environment is important to me. Basically, students in all countries are agreeing with this. But then, when you look at the agency, my own country, Germany, is at the bottom of the league table. Now, a lot of teaching in this field. But, I can do something about the problem of the world. Just 40% of students think, they can make a difference. France, very, very similar. Very few countries, at the top end of the scale. But even there, you have, still a lot of young people who do not feel that sense of empowerment. Now, why is it so important, bringing that back? And that's actually girls are doing better than boys on this. This is also very interesting that actually, when you think about agency, you think about boys, but actually, in all countries for which we have data, girls are actually better in, articulating themselves and taking responsibility, mobilizing their skills. And last but not least, the more actually young people do in school rather than just learn, the more interest they have in learning about other cultures, the more awareness they have about global issues, the more agency or responsibility they feel concerning the planet, the greater self-efficacy they feel, the more cognitive adaptability, resilience of this. So you can really see that agency, being able to express yourself, taking responsibility in school, has a huge influence on the way in which young people actually, shape the future, shape the world. In a nutshell, children are perfectly capable to do that. We need to give them the space to actually, find their own place in this world, to take responsibility. And if we do, you can see here, it has a lot of positive impacts.
Thank you so much, Andrea. But just a quick question, because I'm quite interested in the fact that girls seems to do better than boys. How do you analyze that? It's not. I not want to be jokey, you see, but just to have a real rational things about that. How do you analyze that?
Yeah, actually, that is not so surprising. Girls are also more aware of global issues. They take a greater interest in other people. When you think about, often we talk about empathy as something that is between individuals, but we can also look at empathy as something that is at the level of a system. To what extent are you open to other ways of thinking, other cultures, other ideas, and there girls generally do better. And this agency really comes from that. If you want to take responsibility, the first thing is you have to be open to the world. No?
Yeah, you're right. Okay, thank you so much, Andreas, for this overview of what Pais told us. François, it's your turn to give your quick overview about the project in consistency with the topic we are discussing this morning. This morning for us, sorry, for France, but not for everybody. I'm sorry, Kieran, and I'm sorry also for Rana.
Thank you so much for the powerful words we already heard. I think that the question of, what would kids do if we were inviting them to ask for new rights is very dear to my heart. I think that we see today that the world is indeed not going in the right direction. The fantastic WHO, UNICEF, Lancet reports highlight that, their life expectancy is at risk. They will see a decline in life expectancy because of climate change, because of pollution, because of obesity, because of all sorts of addictions that are man-made addictions. There are company-made addictions. And so, we have to help them to care for themselves, care for others, and to care for the planet. And in order to do that, we have to listen to what they really want to see in terms of change. And that's why we have to invite them to have new rights. But we have to understand, what is the history of rights? Look at it, several of you talk about global citizenship. None of us is a global citizen. We are at best local citizens, but children are not considered to be citizens in most countries. They cannot participate directly into the decision-making that affect them. And that's, in a way, somewhat contradictory to the UN declarations of children's rights, but that's the way it's happening in most places. And so the history of citizenship starts, of course, in Athens. But Athens created the notion of citizenship. But if you look at who were citizens, there were no women, there were no poor, there were no migrants, there were no children, and there were no slaves. And this notion of citizenship has been reinvented later on during the Enlightenment. It went from the city level in Athens to the national level during the Enlightenment. But you know what? The very same people were still not considered citizens. Okay, the Human Rights Declaration was actually a men's rights declaration. Okay, and so again, the poor, the migrants, the women, and the children and the slaves were still out of the equations of citizenship. And so today we talk about global citizenship, but I think we have to make sure that it's citizenship for everyone, not just the wealthy, rich white men like in the previous two creations of rights. And we have to be able to co-construct those new rights. And typically children are always out of the equations. Only very recently we started to talk about children's rights. And even then, we didn't wrote those rights with them. We granted them those rights. Okay, adults decided that children may deserve this right or that right, and I think that the first time it was discussed in the international arena was in 1924. So we are reaching 100th anniversary of that moment. And so what can we do in the 3 years to come to create a global movement where indeed children's rights becomes part of global citizenship, and actually we invent together with them the very notion of global citizens, because none of us is a global citizen. None of us directly can contribute to the global decisions, even though all the problems that we face now, all the major problems are global problems, but companies can be multinational, but the children's rights movement or the global citizen movement is not yet a truly empowering movement happening at all scale. So I think we have to be able to invent this together. And I'm so glad that there is different people from different continents representing some diversity of perspective that can come together and maybe be able to work together with international organizations on this. Because many international organizations, including OECD, that Andreas represents today, and many others, have this at heart. And yet, when you look at them, they don't have enough connection with what's happening on the ground. And the people that are on the ground don't have enough connections among themselves to be able to have a global impact. And I think what we can build is what's called a middle ground, a place where the upper ground institutions and the underground activists can come together to together have a true impact on these very questions.
Thank you so much, François. You said two things very important for Dominic, to make the link between you and Dominic. You said, have the kids part of the equation for the citizenship. And I think it's very key in what Dominic did with the chart of the Parisian kids. And you said co-construction, and I think it's exactly the other point. So Dominic, it's up to you to explain the project you led and the fact that I'm sure that it's going to give another little project in other towns that you will inspire the other town to make sure that they can do the same thing. You have to switch on your mic because it's not working. I'm sorry, it's technical issues. It's always a nightmare in that kind of situation.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry, I will speak in French. It will be easier for me. And I will speak slowly, so Ed could translate. So I have to be concentrated. Oui, donc, comme vous le savez, j'ai été défenseur des enfants. En anglais, on dit Ombudsman for Children. On va plutôt dire Ombudswoman for Children, de 2006 à 2011. Et cela m'a beaucoup permis de travailler. D'ailleurs, je me suis rendue en Irlande et je connais le Centre pour les droits de l'enfant où travaille Nico Brando. Peut-être, Ed, vous traduisez, comment on fait?
Oui, ça y est, en fait, Everything is written directly in the chat to make sure that the translation is like a simultaneous one, like in the Olympic Games, you know, when there is a fantastic sportive. So you are an athlete. You're an athlete.
It's
now.
incredible, incredible. Thank you very much. Donc, depuis 2014, je suis maire adjointe de Paris, chargée de la protection de l'enfance auprès de la maire de Paris, Anne Hidalgo. Et depuis cette nouvelle mandature, puisque nous avons été réélus en 2020, nous avons décidé de mettre l'accent sur les droits de l'enfant, la promotion des droits de l'enfant et le fait de faire vraiment connaître à tous les enfants parisiens. Il y a 400 000 enfants de 0 à 18 ans à Paris environ. Et notre challenge, notre objectif est que sur les 6 années qui viennent, tous les enfants parisiens connaissent leurs droits fondamentaux, c'est-à-dire les droits de la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant, et qu'ils puissent aussi connaître tous les lieux, les personnes ressources, les lieux ressources, les numéros de téléphone utiles et les adresses utiles comme celle du défenseur des droits. Alors, comment est-ce que l'on a décidé de mettre en place cet énorme objectif? Eh bien, tout d'abord, en créant une mission droits de l'enfant au cœur de la mission de protection de l'enfance. Et deuxièmement, en donnant la parole aux enfants systématiquement pour connaître leurs besoins et les exprimer à travers une charte parisienne des droits de l'enfant. Alors, je vais vous parler là de la charte parisienne des droits de l'enfant. Nous avons, pendant la période du confinement au mois de mars, travaillé avec un groupe d'enfants, 170 enfants, et nous leur avons, tout d'abord, nous les avons informés sur... il y a quelqu'un qui ne voit pas la traduction sur le chat. Nous les avons informés sur la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant, puisque la base pour nous, c'est la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant. Bien que la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant, aujourd'hui, et on le voit à travers qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait comme droit à nouveau, à l'époque, il y a plus de 30 ans, ne parlait pas quasiment de la planète. Et on sait qu'aujourd'hui, quand on fait des consultations avec les enfants, leur première problématique, c'est la planète, vivre dans une planète saine, avec un air que l'on peut respirer pour avoir une bonne santé. Et ce n'était pas le projet il y a plus de 30 ans, parce que, vous le savez, la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant, elle est issue de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, de la Shoah et de tous les enfants qui sont morts pendant cette période terrible. Donc, aujourd'hui, il faut penser autrement. Et nous avons fait travailler les enfants sur la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant et nous leur avons demandé d'écrire une charte parisienne pour les droits de l'enfant à l'attention de la maire de Paris pour que nous, élus pendant les 6 ans qui viennent, nous protégions, nous développions les droits fondamentaux qui sont les plus importants pour les enfants. Alors, vous voyez, ça, c'est la charte parisienne des droits de l'enfant. Et là, c'est la signature de la maire de Paris et les noms de tous les enfants. Et c'est très important parce que la maire de Paris a signé cette charte pour l'appliquer. Et ce qui est très intéressant, c'est que les enfants ont demandé qu'on prête attention à 6 droits fondamentaux. Tout d'abord, le droit de pouvoir parler, s'exprimer, conseiller la maire de Paris et dire ce qu'ils veulent pour Paris. Donc, être des citoyens de Paris. Ensuite, un droit très important, le droit à être protégé dans leur milieu des violences, protégé dans leur milieu familial, protégé à l'école. Le droit à ne pas subir de discrimination, le droit à ce que les enfants handicapés aient les mêmes droits que tous les enfants, le droit à vivre dans un monde plus solidaire, à ce qu'on aide leurs familles quand elles sont pauvres et à ce qu'eux-mêmes deviennent des acteurs de solidarité. Et le 6e droit, c'est qu'on puisse faire d'eux des acteurs pour protéger la planète. Voilà, c'est très intéressant, c'est très important. Et donc, nous allons, je ne sais pas où j'en suis du temps, nous allons donc travailler grâce à cette mission des droits de l'enfant où des jeunes volontaires des droits, formés pendant très solidement, vont aller dans toutes les écoles, dans tous les clubs sportifs, dans tous les foyers où il y a des enfants qui sont confiés pour être protégés, dans tous les foyers où il y a des enfants handicapés pour leur dire quels sont leurs droits parce que c'est en leur faisant connaître leurs droits d'enfant qu'ils vont pouvoir devenir des citoyens en construction, des citoyens du monde. Et je confirme ce qu'ont dit tous les participants, les enfants sont capables. Ils sont capables de savoir, dès leur très jeune âge, ceux que nous avons interrogés avaient entre 9 et 14 ans, ils sont capables de savoir, mais le problème, l'obstacle principal, c'est que les adultes ne le croient pas. Et ça, c'est le principal obstacle au fait que les enfants puissent co-construire avec les adultes. Voilà, donc merci pour m'avoir invité à participer.
Elsa, on t'entend pas?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw your gesture. So, okay.
Est-ce que je peux rajouter, je ne sais pas, maintenant, ce que nous allons faire en plans spéciaux, ou vous me poserez la question après?
No, I'm going to ask you a question right now, just to start the concrete things, because now we know who is doing what are the opinion of everybody. So now we can try to answer this question: what if we give more rights, or what if new rights, but to kids? So what is interesting with your example, Dominic, is it would be interesting that you explain how you did this job, on what kind of tools do you lean on to make sure that kids could express themselves correctly? Because now we see the result, this chart, the fact that 170 kids participated to that, the fact that they insist on 6 fundamental rights, but it would be very interesting to know how you did the job. How to, with what kind of teachers, what kind of adults, how do you selected the kids, etc.
Oui, en fait, c'était très facile parce que les enfants sont très intelligents et que c'est très simple d'arriver à les faire travailler et à les motiver sur leurs droits. Alors, ça s'est fait en 2 ateliers. Le premier atelier a été organisé avec des spécialistes des droits de l'enfant, Catherine Claveau, qui était ma conseillère lorsque j'étais défenseur des enfants au niveau national, et ensuite Jonathan Levy, qui est aussi un spécialiste des droits de l'enfant en France. Et donc, dans la première séance, nous leur avons vraiment bien fait comprendre ce que dit la Convention internationale et les différents droits fondamentaux que la Convention internationale pose pour tous les enfants. Et dans une deuxième séance d'atelier, nous leur avons dit, voilà, maintenant vous connaissez les droits qui sont dans la Charte internationale des droits de l'enfant. Et donc, vous allez vous répartir dans des groupes et vous allez dire quels sont pour vous les droits les plus importants, quels sont vos besoins les plus importants et qu'est-ce que vous voudriez qu'à Paris, vous, citoyens de Paris, vous puissiez, sur quoi vous voulez que vos élus puissent vous aider et puissent réaliser les droits qui correspondent à vos besoins les plus importants. Et en fait, ils ont travaillé à partir d'ateliers d'écriture, de dessin, et ils ont posé des paroles qui font que nous avons juste mis de l'ordre dans leurs paroles, mais nous n'avons pas réécrit à leur place. Nous avons utilisé uniquement les mots des enfants. Et c'est ça qui est extraordinaire. Ils sont capables d'écrire une charte des droits de l'enfant. Ça, c'est assez extraordinaire. Et je voulais préciser que dans les enfants, il y avait des enfants qui représentent tous les quartiers de Paris, toutes les classes sociales. Il y avait aussi des enfants qui vivent dans des centres d'hébergement de familles sans domicile et aussi dans un centre d'enfants réfugiés que nous avons donc ouvert pour des familles réfugiées. Yeah. Donc, c'était vraiment très intéressant et il y avait une vraie représentation de ce qu'est Paris, qui est une très grande ville avec une énorme diversité, avec des gens venus de partout dans le monde. Ce n'est pas une ville où tout le monde ressemble à tout le monde. C'est très divers. Voilà.
It's a little world, I think. Like Riverside School is a little India, it's a little world as well. Thank you so much, Dominic, to give these details about how you did for the chart. I think it's very interesting what you said. You said that it's very difficult to have the adult believe that kids can be able to discuss about that kind of topic and to make sure that they can express their own rights or new rights. I would be very interesting to have your view, Zamzam, on that. In a youth perspective, is it easy to have the kid voice express in the civilian life? Or what are the main barriers you have to face? Is it the same? Are they the same? What Dominique mentioned just before?
So I think from my perspective, and I have confidently said this in front of, I've been in the environmental sector for the last 3 to 4 years, and have worked with some of the biggest NGOs, worked with some of the some very esteemed professors in the field. I've worked with some very, I guess, some very esteemed individuals in the field. And I can say the most incredible people that I've ever worked with have been young people. And I think to understand their ability to understand the intersectionality between different experiences, to me, is incredible, for them to understand and their interpretation of the world. And I think one of the most important things is that, and like Andreas mentioned, is that the education system exists in order to completely brainwash us, in the sense that, like, remove us as critical thinkers and really limit the way in which we see the world and the ability that we have access to anything and everything. And so the younger you are, the more you have the ability to reimagine the world in a way in which I can't even begin to comprehend, and let alone somebody that's older than me. And I think that's for that very reason, I think young people play such a pivotal part in, like, rebuilding and reimagining what is possible without restrictions. And I think that's so incredibly important. That's so powerful to understand. But actually I wanted to highlight something that was mentioned by Francois, in the sense that, like, at the end of the day, I think for me, I've done a lot of work around climate education, and I recognize that climate education is the solution to breaking a cycle that has existed, in the sense that our education, like, the reality is the people that make the decisions that make the most harm to our society are the most educated individuals, in the sense, you know, that they're the parliamentarians, the researchers, essentially. And so actually, like, there is a fundamental system with our education system, and it will break that barrier. But I think what we need to be careful in doing, and often almost always when we have these conversations, which is that, like, the solution and fixing climate change and climate change doesn't sit with young people. It sits with the people who are elected to lead. It sits with the people that run the big NGOs. It sits with the people that have a stake in big businesses. It sits with those individuals, because the reality is we don't have time for the incredible 10-year-old that is writing policy and wants to influence, for her to grow up and become the prime minister, to be able to make those changes. The impact of the climate change is happening so rapidly and affecting lives right now as we speak, that there's a sense of urgency that's almost always missed and undermined in addressing the issue that's at hand. And I think that's incredibly important when we talk about young people, because the reality is young people need the ability to be critical thinkers and have that space to analyze and reimagine their future. But right now, as we speak, their future is being robbed off them. And I think that's an incredible distinction to make, in the sense of that where the line essentially lays in engaging with young people and the power that they hold in changing their own realities. And I think one of the things I wanted to highlight was the direct realities of climate change in the UK. Towards the early last year, it was the first time a coroner essentially concluded that a young girl, Ella, 9 years old, died of air pollution because of the area that she lived in. And I think it's so pivotal when we hear, when we talk about, like, there are deaths happening in Bangladesh because of floods or mudslides in Nigeria, and people losing thousands of homes, or even, like, the droughts happening in East Africa, right? And so, but those experiences are so distant from home, and we forget the sense of urgency because it's so far from our realities. But actually, when it's happening and people's life expectancies are being reduced in the very areas in which we live in the places that we grew up, and you can see that, I think that should definitely create a sense of urgency. And so I'm gonna conclude there, because I could talk about this subject for hours.
But we don't have an hour. I'm sorry.
So yeah, I'm gonna pass on to someone else.
But I will come back to you for another question just in a few minutes, I think. But yes, it's interesting what you said. But when we prepared this roundtable with Nicholas, you told me, Nicholas, that something was very surprising when you give the mic to the young, especially in South America, when they are used to work where they are kids, so it could be a problem, and it's very, how can I say, disturbing from an adult perspective, I think, to see that they are more, how can I say, they are more incapacity to understand that we cannot prevent them from working, for instance, but we have to define a kind of framework to make sure that they can work in the best protection we can give us.
Indeed, thank you, Elsa. I think that actually one of the most gratifying features of doing research jointly with children and youth themselves is when you surprise yourself that you realize that you're not the expert that you thought you was, right? So you can have spent all your life studying children, looking at children, reading all the documents, reading the books, reading the articles, and then a 5-year-old child just comes up with a truth that decades of research on it may not have, you may not have access to that element. And I think you mentioned the question of child workers, and I think that personally for me, this has been one of the most surprising issues to deal with, because as you mentioned, when we arrive to experts to analyze particularly issues that affect children from more vulnerable areas that have a different life world, a different conception of the world, that they live in a different reality. We arrive from certain misconceptions, sometimes the fact of coming from the global north may affect the way that researchers study, for example, working children in Latin America. But and our economic conditions also affected, but I think that as a core issue, especially when doing research on childhood, is that we have very strong limitations by the fact of being adults. We have a certain form of understanding what the world is, what the world should be, what children should be, what their best interests are. And this limits a lot the scope of opportunities that we have available when thinking about solutions to children's problems, especially very vulnerable children.
Would you say, Nicholas, that we forgot that we were kids once?
Well, so I think there's a part that is that I think that there's certain interests and I think that this reflects what Sam mentioned before. There's a matter of urgency, and I don't think it's only because of the fact that if we wait for children to grow up, let's say the planet will have already passed the deadline of making change, but also because there's a particularity in being a child, in the way they see the world and that they see themselves, that allows them to see them from a different perspective. But I think that beyond, I think I agree that the fact that we've forgotten that we were children is an important element, but there's the other, that there's certain realities that we don't have access to directly, and we have only had access to it through books or through indirect research. So in the case of children workers, we as researchers, we always try to think of it as how we in our, let's say, in our comfortable world would deal with this problem, how we see our own children safe in schools and protected by parents and without very harsh poverty issues. But when we ask children workers who live in more dire conditions themselves, they just simply see the alternative of, okay, you could live in a perfect world where you don't have to work. They don't understand, and they don't believe that that's even possible. The reality in which they live forces them to work. They don't do it because they're happy about it. They do it because they're certain that the family needs their support, and the solutions that they themselves propose. For example, the child worker unions in Latin America are very adamant about this, is that they don't want child work to be banned, what they want is their status as workers to be recognized and their rights as children to be fully fulfilled, so that they're not exploited, so that they're not harmed by the fact that they have to work. So their concern is with the socioeconomic conditions that affect their status, rather than with the fact of working or not. And I think that this is particularly shocking, because we tend to think, no, what we should do is ban work for children. Children should be at schools. But when you ask child workers themselves, they may provide you with a different way of understanding of it. Why? Because they've lived it. They live every day the condition of children who have to work, who may not have the best educational opportunities, who suffer under very harsh conditions. And listening to their own epistemic standpoint can allow us to think of alternative ways of fixing the problem, of thinking it from their perspective, standing on their shoes, and asking questions that are relevant to the persons themselves that are being affected by these issues and by this lack of protection of rights that we think is relevant to tackle.
Yes, you're right. The problem is not the fact that children are working. The problem is the fact that why they should work. It's why they have to work, because of the inequality. And that the problem is to solve it. This one as the other thing is the consequences of a major issue before that, I think. Thank you so much, Niklas. And
thanks to you.
Kiran, yeah, I would be glad to hear from you about your Riverside School, because this school gives kids employment, but not only, and that's pretty interesting, because when we prepared this roundtable, I was very impressed by that. It's not only based on the fact that they have to express their rights and to design their rights and so on, but also figuring out that they have duties as well to express that the world is the right balance between both. I think it's interesting to have your point of view on that, and you're coming from your experience.
Yeah, thanks, Elsa. And just resonating everything that Zamzam and of course Nico has said. But I think coming from India, I think the diversity and inequity that one encounters compels one to look at rights, not in isolation, right? I mean, otherwise rights can be seen as deserving of independent of whatever I have to do to actually deserve or earn the right. And so many of the majority of our children now, I see across the world, the awareness of the rights has been compromised. Just like Nico said, I don't even know my worldview. I don't even know that I had access to this understanding of right. But for those who do, and for where there has been rights as a part of the conversation, as a part of shaping their education, then it is imperative that the right is not in isolation, but has to be balanced and shaped by the duties. And I, of course, come from the land of Gandhi, and he's hanging around watching me every single day. And he had something wonderful to say. He said, I would only enjoy the rights whose duties I perform. So I believe that it's important to have this idea of entitlement and privilege to kind of be shaped by what do I do to deserve it and earn it. So for instance, right to healthy food. Well, the duty is I will not waste and I will have gratitude. Or the right for play, and I will include. So you have to kind of balance that your right is, you can enjoy it if you fulfill the duty to it. So I think at Riverside, I think it has to go hand in hand, because a lot of our children come from an idea of a certain privilege, a certain awareness that I do have a dream, I have a right, I have this thing, but the entitlement cannot be their understanding of their worldview. So we really give immersive experiences for children to understand their rights and duties in perspective, and to recognize that they have to uphold that and for the other. So it's not just for self. It is not just the right for myself, but it also is to do right by the rights. And I think that's really an important distinction that I would like to keep having when I hear the word right. For me, I feel that there's a slight, it could give a little arrogance in the fact that, I deserve it, but no, I have to also earn it. And I have to earn it also for the other. So I think for me, duty is a very, very big balance that one has to play with it.
Can you develop, because you told me that yesterday, and it was very nice to understand, the kind of trainee your students are doing to make sure that they understand that duties exist and they have to combine everything. Because it's interesting to see the change of the switch of the behavior.
Yes, I'll give you one example. And since Nico was talking about child labor, one of the experiences our 10-year-olds all go through is the idea of child rights and the idea of exploitation and how rights are taken away from some of the most vulnerable. So they go through a child rights experience where they have to roll incense sticks for 3 days. Okay, so they start the experience as if, oh, yes, I'm going to roll 100 incense sticks, and it's all a challenge. And I kid you not, in the first half hour of that experience, their body is aching, their shoulders are paining. They feel that sense of, burden of, I don't have right to play. And suddenly it settles in that they could have the great luxury of going home at the end of this experience, having a bath, speaking to their parent, having a warm hug from the parents. But so many of our children don't. And by the end of the third day of that experience, there's a massive, not just intellectual understanding, but a bodily understanding of rights and duties. So your whole body has to be involved in understanding your worldview, not just an intellectual understanding. So I feel that that's something that we do at Rivers. And coming back to Andreas's understanding that so much of the education is so compliant that children don't use their body to understand where they fit in with the world. So yes, so a lot of it is an immersive experience to get perspective.
Yeah, but it's a way to start empowered as well. I think the child skills as well, the soft skills as well, not only academic one. And it's exactly what Rana did with We Love Reading project. You experiment the beginning of, if I can say that, a virtual circle to empower young people thanks to reading. Can you explain the main learning you could share regarding this experience, and especially linked to this ability? Reading is given not only to define a new world or the paradise or something like that, but the way to empower yourself.
Absolutely. And actually, I want to point to the data that Andreas had shared, that it's not about awareness, it's about motivation. That's what's lacking in our education system. And not just motivation, how do we motivate children, but how do we reach every child, even those who are working as child laborers, and not just the ones who are privileged to be motivated to make a difference, but everybody around the world. And so what We Love Reading does is that through the simple reading aloud in your native language, even making up a story from a book with text, just to tie it in the brain of the child that this is linked to education, you are creating not just knowledge, but critical thinking skills, so that they are not tricked, that they demand evidence, they want to read it and not just hear it from somebody. It also develops their vocabulary, so they're better at expressing themselves, not violently, but in words. They learn about other cultures and develop that empathy and to listen, and that makes them respect others, even if we disagree, to create a dialogue and a debate and a conversation and to communicate better. But most importantly, for the motivation part, is that they draw the courage and the confidence from the stories they read for fun to become the heroes and the change makers, to realize those dreams that they have, to make a difference in their community. And I think by doing it in the native language, not in a particular language of English or French, but in your local language, and to read stories from your local culture, because part of that motivation comes from feeling pride of where you come from, and not being that victim and having that agency. And that comes when you're reading in your native language. That helps improve your imagination and look at yourself and feel yourself and perceive yourself in a whole different light. And I think that's what We Love Reading does. And it also helps create team play, teamwork, and working together, because now we have a common goal and we can come together and experiment going forward. So I think all those skills come from a very simple, pivotal entry point, which is reading. And I just want to comment on the child labor as well. I mean, we know in the past there were factories where people would be reading aloud. This is way back. And so when children realize that this is a way to have fun, they will seek those opportunities. So even, it's not about taking them out of child labor. No, it's about dealing with the situation as it is. And that's why We Love Reading becomes that simple thing that can be introduced and be created to reach the masses and all children around the world, to give them that opportunity to discover themselves.
And to be in a part of a transmission system as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, because people talk about percentage of children. We know in vulnerable communities, children are not just 20 or 30%, they're actually even much more. For example, in the refugee context in Jordan, we have 60% are children. And so they are the creators of the future. And so if we give them these skills, first they become lifelong learners, and then they will have the skills to be equipped to deal with this future that none of us can imagine today at all. And what we can do is not give them the knowledge, but give them the skills and the tools that they will use to create a better future for themselves and the world.
Yeah, and the soft skill as well, the motivation you mentioned before, and some of those stuff like that. Yes, you're right. I want to go to the third part of this debate with Andreas, because everybody reacts to the PISA figures. So, and especially Rana, you know, as a scientist, you see everything very concrete to try to monitor everything and to compare. I want to ask you something, Andreas. Did you notice real changes in terms of health or education of poverty in country which consider more kids' voices as a valuable one? Is there concrete consequences on that?
Yeah, I can't talk so much about health, but on the education front, yes, absolutely. And I think Francois made that point already. You know, inclusive societies are always more productive. They're always more resilient because they can draw on all of their talent. And you can see the same thing. Education systems that are more inclusive by co-creating learning environments with children, with students, they're more effective. Now, if you look at, you know, Estonia, Finland, they have about half of the learning hours than the other European education systems, and they have superior outcomes. They start schooling at the age of 7, and by the age of 15, they surpass everyone because, you know, they have a much broader, you know, emphasis on, you know, the cognitive, the social and emotional development. If young people read with motivation, with intrinsic interest, with access to effective, you know, learning strategies, they learn very differently than if they are spoon-fed by their teacher. And by the way, in the pandemic, that's been hugely amplified. You know, young people who had that agency, who could learn on their own, who could set their own learning goals, monitor their learning, they could cope with distance learning. And again, it's the children who were passive consumers, I think, who lost out on this. And when I talk about co-creation in the highest performing education systems, it's not so much about, you know, making school a supermarket where you can choose what you like to learn. You know, I don't like mathematics, therefore, you know, I study history. No, that's not the point. It's about having teachers who have a genuine interest in their students, who they are, who they want to become, you know, what their kind of dreams and passions are. I think like, I think the Kieran's example, that's really the point, to have not, you know, necessarily more choice in the schools, but a very different relationship between educators and learners. Now, where also, you know, both teachers and children are willing not just to learn, but also to unlearn and relearn when things change. And children are actually very, very good at this. And as adults, it's very, very hard for us. So I think those kinds of learning environment are significantly more productive. Easy to say, hard to do. No, it's actually, when you talk about this with teachers, for many teachers, it's, you know, this kind of democratization of learning is a very hard step. You lose your monopoly. You accept, you know, that your learners are actually also teachers, that actually everybody learns in a school. It's not just the students, it's the teachers, it's the system that learns. And that's very, very hard for people to actually do. But again, you know, we have fantastic examples. And it's not just whole systems. You have in many education systems, fantastic schools that do that every day. But it's far too, you know, we need to get out of this very industrial culture of learning, where again, you know, you have someone in the government who thinks, you know, I know what every student should be learning. Then, you know, I train my teachers to do that. The teachers deliver that to the students. And then at the end, you know, students are passive consumers. No, actually, it's about co-creating that learning at the front line. And where that happens, actually, the outcomes speak for themselves, I think. And that's what we see in the PISA assessment. That's also why in PISA, recently, we have given so much emphasis, not just to the cognitive learning, but also the social and emotional outcomes. Now, whether it's courage, whether it's resilience, whether it's empathy, whether it's creativity. And even, you know, very banal kind of outcomes. You know, one of the most shocking outcomes from the last PISA assessment in the field of reading, you know, I think Rana will be interested in this, is that, you know, it was only 1 in 10 15-year-olds who could reliably distinguish a fact from an opinion. You know, they have all been taught to read. They have spent hours and hours and hours of reading. And then you have 1 in 10 young people who can navigate ambiguity, which is the kind of topic of the day in a digital world. No? It really shows this disconnect between what the world commands and what actually education needs to produce and create today. But again, I'm optimistic about it. It's not rocket science. There are many good examples.
Yes, but what is very strange is when it deals with the PISA results in the media, for instance, it's always focused on academic knowledge regarding the ranking in all the countries in Europe. So, whereas it's not only that, because what you reveal to us, there are many soft skills which are evaluated directly with kids. So, what can we do? Because we all agree on these roundtables to say that we need to change. We know that it's a virtual circle where we decide to involve kids in the solution, especially in co-created education. So what can we do to shift the system?
Well, I think, it starts with educators. I think where you have educators who really sort of have an engagement with their students. Actually, by the way, the educators are much happier. It's not just that students learn better. Actually, when you look at job satisfaction and self-efficacy among teachers, it's best when learning is co-created. So actually, you make your educators happier as well. So that's the one part of the coin. The other part is, we need to tackle the gateways in education. One of the biggest barriers to any change is the kind of exams that we have. I want to get my child to Harvard, therefore, you need to learn all of that stuff, irrespective of how the world looks like. And that's something I think is not very difficult to do, but I think really, really important. Education is a very conservative social enterprise, perhaps the most conservative social enterprise, and we should be honest, as parents, we are often part of the problem. We are not part of the solution. We get so anxious when our children no longer learn what is so important to us, or when they do start to learn things that we no longer understand. So I think we are part of that problem. I think you need to break that kind of the gateways. What are the kind of criteria for success, and where you change them, you do see actually very quickly change on the ground. But because most teachers actually want to work differently. They know that they are unhappy in the kind of system where they are just, mechanical agents. Yeah. And so I think those two areas, on the front line, creating more space for, teacher autonomy and a collaborative culture, also for sharing and spreading innovation. We spend so much time, pushing ideas into schools and so little time to find the good ideas and scale and spread them. That's, I think, one of the part of the equation. The other part is harder to change. That's the gateways, really.
Yeah, but you're right. Thank you, Andres, for this highlight. I think it was important to understand that. François, from your experience and research, my mother disagrees with what Andres says, so the reason why the phone is ringing. I'm sorry. No. François, from your experience and research, how could the adults and education system could participate to enhance kids' empowerment?
So thanks. I think adults can certainly play an important role in terms of empowering the young ones, and in terms of of making feel good when they are exploring. I think all human beings are able to explore and exploit. Okay, and we've overemphasized the tendency to exploit, and so much that we exploit ourselves, we exploit others, we exploit the natural environment, and the limitations to exploitation is ever more obvious. Okay, but we can also enhance the ability to explore. And this is very true among the young ones. It's been shown by cognitive science research like Alison Gopnik that we're all born scientists. We're all born able to learn by exploring the world, experimenting with the world, making mistakes, learning from our mistakes, and revising our ideas. We've developed programs like the Saventurier in France, which is taking the kids as a young scientist and empowering them to explore and discovering learning methods that can empower this. Talking about PISA results, if I understood right, Andreas, Taiwan was the #1 outlier in empowerment. And interestingly, they are generalizing these sorts of methods. But it's also a country it's a very young democracy very much like Estonia in a sense. And it's also submitted to a very strong pressure, very much like Estonia, of powerful neighbors that may or may not respect their democracy and freedom. And what they are trying to do is to empower their youth in ways, and their citizens in general. And I think, Taiwan is also the place that has the best faced the epidemics. They never had lockdown, and they have very, very few casualties. And when you look at the way they're doing it, what they're doing with the young ones and with the citizens is about the same. Okay, for instance, there is a hotline where everyone can call and about the epidemics. And there was an 8-year-old that called and say, I won't go to school tomorrow because the only masks that are left are pink masks, and as a boy, I'll be, harassed if I wear a pink mask. And this little boy called, and the following day, the Minister of Health on TV was wearing a pink mask, and all of his advisors were wearing pink masks. And so they were very reactive, being able to listen to that child concern, which is in fact a concern that was very global. And I think that what I like in what Taiwan is also doing is, they are inviting children to work on the challenges that they feel are the most relevant to their future. And so they can spend, an important part of their learning journey focusing on what they care for. But another thing they've done is they started to build on civic tech. And actually their current Ministry of Digital Technology, when she was 13-year-old, she was a boy first, she became transgender. And second, she already was a hacker. Okay, so they put a civic hacker at the head of a ministry, and now they've built a civic technology at the front line of empowering kids and citizens. And so I'm telling this because I think these sorts of tools, the civic tech tools, together with what Dominique was telling us in terms of empowering children to tell us, what are their rights, and what Kieran was saying in terms of, what are their duties that are going to their rights, and, relating to what Nico and Zamzam were saying, and Rana, in terms of, what are the willingness of the children that may be different in different countries. And so my point is, how can we scale what Dominique was presenting to the world? It's not just about 100 French Parisian kids that can answer the question of what are the most important rights of today, but what if it was billions of kids across the planet that we're inviting to sell this? And then we can probably see, patterns. There might be some universals, like, the right for a future and the right for a decent environment, but also local specificities. And it will be very interesting to have a map like this, and maybe correlate it with, the sort of data that Andreas has in terms of, the evolutions of various societies and various education systems. And we could not only crowdsource, the children's perspective on these things, but also the teacher's perspective and the parents' perspective. And try to see, where they are very aligned and where, there might be discrepancy, and start to have at least, both local and global conversation on, what are children's rights, what they should be, how should they evolve, and how should they be implemented? Because it's one thing to have a theoretical right. It's another to be able to be empowered by that right, so that you can become an active citizens, local citizen, a global citizen, in a way a fractal citizen, able to think at the various scales about the various issues that you're faced with, and able to contribute to face your personal challenge, your community challenge, and all global challenges. And I think building that infrastructure becomes possible. These civic tech tools, these tools for collective intelligence and collective empowerment exist. We could just adapt them to the specific issues we are discussing today. And for instance, in Chile, there was a movement called Chilecracia, where every citizen of the country was invited to rewrite the constitution, because still to this day, they have, Pinochet inherited constitution, and they want to have a rewrite. And so how can you invite people to rewrite not only a local constitution in Chile, but sort of a global children's rights perspective? Is I think those tools exist and could be scaled pretty easily. We just have to do this. And I think if I just look at the quality of the people around the table, and some of those that are listening to us and many others outside of this circle, we could all invite them to contribute collectively to co-design the tools and the means and the campaign to empower the youth to be able to deal this.
Thank you so much, Francois. I'm very sad because only 10 minutes left to make the conclusion, and I had so many questions to ask you, but I'm sure that we can have another meeting to discuss furthermore this fantastic topic. But just to conclude, I'm going to give you the voice to everybody so that you can give you first your own feeling about what could be the consequences of involving kids more deeply in the process, just in few words, maybe one word to summarize your idea. And please share a book or share a quote or a music or whatever is inspired you on your day-to-day work with kids. So I'm going to choose Zamzam. It's up to you. What could be interesting, sorry, Zamzam, because you told me when we prepared the roundtable that integrating kids in the process will help politicians think long-term perspective as well. It's not something that we said, so I'm sure that we can insist on that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the solution is not tokenizing young people and their voices and not undermining them when they express issues and concerns with systems that essentially involve them, but will involve them later down the line. And so my call was to NGOs, big businesses, and political leaders who say they engage young people by establishing a youth board or having one tokenized voice as a tick box exercise to avoid doing that, and actually engaging with young people and ensuring that like there is clear and respectable dialogue, and then they're not exploited for their time as volunteers in processes, and actually are compensated and brought into these organizations and respected for the time and the input and the work that they put into these organizations. And often almost I've seen far too many organizations who would usually pay a consultant to come in and do work, but instead bring in like a bunch of like volunteers to do work for them and exploit them in the sense that by trying to solve an issue, but actually by tokenizing their voices. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think for me, just knowing that there's a lot of people on this on the panel list, and where everybody wants to obviously get some words in, I think I would end by saying, and wanted to touch on something, but I'm gonna a little bit leave it. But for me, I wanted to not conflate the ideas of basic rights with a sense of duty. And I said, because to me, duty comes after you have your basic rights. And I think to me, education sits as a very basic and fundamental right that we owe to every citizen, regardless of whether they've worked for it or deserved it. And I think those are very fundamental things that we should understand and highlight. And I think for me, as now a young activist, rather than the ages and the children that I work with, for me, I've seen over the years how young voices are probably the most powerful. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is how connected and how powerful we are, in the sense that we can mass mobilize, quite literally become a global village, in the sense that I can now start a hashtag and organize with millions and millions of people from every corner of the planet. And I think that's powerful to understand. And I think the book I'm going to recommend is a book called, it's a very simple organizing tool. It's called How to Change It. It was written by a good friend of mine who is one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter campaign in the UK. But it's a very, very simple book for any activist who starting out and wants to understand like how to change any systems and processes that you're involved in. And so that's the advice I would give. Oh.
Okay, no, we share. Yeah, it's a way to change the system, to give a picks, I think so. Thank you so much, Zamzam. I'm sorry I have to cut you because everybody has to talk to give the conclusion. So Dominic, it's your turn to conclude this fantastic debate we had all together, and to give a motto or a books, as Zamzam said, that give you inspire.
Merci beaucoup, hein, c'était passionnant. nous allons continuer en ce qui concerne Paris, à développer la connaissance par les enfants de leurs droits et à leur donner la parole sur tous les sujets qui les concernent et qui concernent la ville. Nous souhaitons devenir une ville leader des droits de l'enfant et nous souhaitons créer le 20 novembre prochain, Journée internationale des droits de l'enfant, un réseau de villes leaders des droits de l'enfant, de villes de France, de villes d'Europe, de villes du monde. Et pour vous donner une inspiration, la source d'inspiration sera le docteur Janusz Korczak, qui était un médecin polonais qui avait écrit un livre merveilleux qui s'appelle Le roi Matthias Ier, The King Matthias I. C'était une fable, un conte pour les enfants, pour amener les enfants à créer une république des enfants et à savoir eux-mêmes gérer la république. C'était en 1922. Et je cite la citation, j'espère qu'elle pourra être traduite. Les enfants auront, dans cette république, les enfants auront les mêmes droits que les adultes et ils seront des citoyens à part entière. Les enfants obéiront non pas parce qu'ils auront peur, mais parce qu'ils voudront eux-mêmes que l'ordre et l'équilibre règnent partout. Voilà.
Wow, all is said. I think it's a great, great conclusion. Thank you, Dominique. Kira, now I want you to hear what is your day-to-day inspiration and how we can conclude this debate from your India perspective and your own experience.
Well, I think the only word I have to say is it's high time. I mean, enough of the conversations. Let's just get down, like Francois said, in the middle road, and let's just be.
Yeah.
So I think for me, of course, Gandhi has always been my inspiration, but I often go to this lovely quote by David Baldwin, who is actually an American novelist. He said, children have never been very good at listening to their adults, but they never fail to imitate them. So I would just say, be worthy of being imitated. Be worthy of those kind of role models where you live your life with a little bit more courage, a little bit more empathy, a little bit more kindness every single day, because they are looking at that and they're learning that over everything else. So I keep saying, you can't be shy or diplomatic as a champion of a child. You have to be totally shameless and you have to have a sense of humor. So you have to live your life with that joy, because contagious is a good word. So you should be very, very contagious.
And if I can add something, it's to change the conversation to conversation.
Yes.
That's it. Okay, I remember what you said. Thank you so much, Kiran. What about you, Rana? I'm sure that you have fantastic books to share and we can help us to conclude this debate, especially with We Love Reading.
Absolutely. I just want to end on the point that, we need, if we include all children and empower them, we will have more representation and more equality. As a biologist, nobody has the same DNA as anyone else, even identical twins, and never will, and it never has been in the past. And it's about celebrating that diversity and making sure that they are all respected and trusted. That's the important thing. Sometimes we don't trust, and I think that's fundamental, to remember to trust them because they know best what is good for them. And then after we bring them, to make sure that that the power dynamics, that there's no unconscious bias, that they're not just tokens, but really listened to and heard. So the celebration of diversity, and then believing in long-term change. That change won't happen overnight. We need to count that into the calculation. And that's the butterfly effect from physics. When a butterfly flutters its wings, in one part of the world, there's a hurricane in the other part of the world. It's about small change that will make an impact in time and space. And I'll end with my favorite book is Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. Which really emphasize that equality, true equality, when we respect everybody, regardless of where they come from, whatever their concepts and ideas are. And thank you very much for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much, Rana. Thank you. Andreas, I'm sure that you have something to share in terms of motto at the OECD or maybe a book to carry on discussing with once we shut off the mic.
Yeah, actually, I encourage you to have a look at our learning compass at the OECD, our work on Education 2030, because it shows there's so many good examples where this happens today. We are not discussing, a distant future. We are discussing things that we can do today. It's about creating more spaces about, for children to express themselves, to understand who they are. It's about, moving away from teaching people something to giving them a reliable compass to navigate for themselves, to find their way through a world that is increasingly volatile and ambiguous. It can be done. You will, get, I think, very good support from educators for this. And there, again, many, many good examples.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Nicolas, few words of conclusion before I just give a question from the audience to Kieran, just after you.
Yes, thanks. So I think that book recommendations, I think that I would strongly recommend reading literature written by children or memoirs written by children. I think that we can gain so much from seeing the world from their perspective. Malala, Greta Thunberg has written great things, The Diaries of Anna Frank. I want to especially recommend a book by Ishmael Bea called A Long Way Gone, and it's his memoirs as a boy soldier. I think it's beautiful. And before I close, I just wanted to recommendation as adults. I think that the words of Bob Dylan, In the Times Are Changing, are the best example of what we can do. Basically, don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons or your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can lend your hand. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for you, because it's fantastic to conclude by Bob Dylan, I think. Okay, thank you so much, François. Just a few words, because I'm sorry, Kieran, I'm going to pass you the question we received so that you can answer directly. It will be easier because it's the end, so time is up. But I just want to hear from François as a conclusion. And before that, because maybe we're going to be switched off in this Zoom room. So I want to thank you all for all the conversation we had. It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So just to say a few more words before we finish, I wanted to share that picture. Actually, this is by an author, which book I recommend. It's called Ugur Galen. Actually, I don't have the copy of the book because I offered it to Dominique Versini last time she visited us a couple of days back. But this is, for me, an artist that speaks beautifully about children's rights by doing collage. And this is just one of his many collages. He's so famous on Instagram, you probably have seen many of his other pictures. But he shows us the image of perfectly happy kids next to perfectly, the most horrible pictures that you can think of human suffering and of children suffering. And I think, his pictures have moved me so much that I think we need indeed to go deep into our emotions. And have this compassion and this kind passion that we were discussing. And I think that we have to create a movement where such images are shared, but also produced and commented and acted upon. And I think that this can work by creating. We are discussing this with Ugur in these very days. We can offer this picture to children and to adults and invite them to reflect on, why is it so moving? What is it that, they would want to do to avoid these terrible things happening? And how do they relate to these things? How can they produce images of what moves them? This collage technique is so easy, very young ones can master it and can start producing their own art. So it's not only that, they should be consuming the art productions of Ugur or others, but they could start creating their own and creating their own campaign. And I know, Kieran has been very good at inviting children to do similar things. And so I think we can start doing these sorts of things. And if I have to end with one quote, I would end with, John Lennon and Yoko Ono. In Imagine, it says, I may be a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I'm a dreamer that, the world can change, but I feel that I'm not the only one either. And actually, what we would love to do is to be able to maybe build a sort of a GPS of dreams where can know where we are on dream landscape and start joining with others that share the same dreams. And we can then start to act on those dreams and build them together. And then I think indeed, that's, also Saint-Exupéry was saying something like this, that, if you don't want to, the reality to eat your dreams, you have to have dreams eat the reality. And so you have to work on your dreams. And that's the sort of things that I think we can start doing together. And Dominique invited us for the next Children's Right Day. Maybe between now and then we can do something great. And, in 2022, when we celebrate, the Republic of Children, maybe we can start building it for real. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francois. I was very optimistic before starting this conversation, but I'm more than that after hearing from all of you. So thank you so much. And I just want to conclude by a sentence. I think it's Aristotle or another philosopher. I'm going to give you the right author of this quote is an adult is never so strong when he decides to be on his knees to talk to a child. And I think that maybe can be the right conclusion of all of this. So we have to start moving forward and moving faster, because it's not to agree everybody on that kind. It's fantastic, but if we talked only with convinced people, you see that it's not going to change the things very fastly. So we have to try to implement everywhere what we can do. And you were so inspired for me. So thank you so much. Thank you, the team from the Learning Planet Festival, to trust me in sharing this debate, which was not so easy for me. I'm very happy to have the chance to meet you all, and I'm sure that we're going to make a lot of things in the few months and even in the few weeks.
Thank you, everybody. God bless. Have a safe day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye. Cheers.
Looking forward to the next part of the adventure.